So I've spent the last hour and longer than an hour, I think, talking about the problems of credibility assessment. And so I'm going to now talk to you about how we have tried to come up with a method for supporting you professionals to do that. And it's not easy, as I think I've provided you with some examples of just how difficult it is. And I'm going to talk to you about a technique called the controlled cognitive engagement, which we shorten to CCE, just simply because everything's got to have a name. So we're going to call it CCE from here on in. And I think it will be of interest for you because I was in the States 5 years ago talking about the work that I do in a laboratory and happened to be speaking to a fairly high up, I won't name him, member of the TSA who said to me, "Okay, well, if you think you can do better, show me." And I looked at my colleague who was standing next to me and we said, "What do you mean, show us?" And he said, "Go and do an empirical study in the real world of aviation security, and I'll fund it." And so we thought, okay, we will do. And that's what I'm going to talk you to very briefly, just to show you how we've taken all the problems and what the psychological theory and empirical evidence tells us, and we've put it all together and tried to come up with a solution, a practical solution that's usable, which maps onto all those, which is not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, as you'll see as we go through, but it's about trying to make a difference. So, I'm going to introduce to you the controlled cognitive engagement. I'm going to talk to you about why it's effective for short, real-time interactions where you've got to make some sort of a decision about whether that person poses a threat to the security of a flight, or it could also be your country. And I'm going to talk to you about an aviation security context. So think about our truth default model. Context is everything. Okay, because it's about behaviour in the context of security, aviation security. I will just tell you about the funders because it'll enable you to understand about the project as a whole. What is that? Oh, okay. That's fine. I was an independent researcher. I'm an independent scientist. I'm a government scientist, but I don't work for any governments at all. So I was told to, okay, go out there and do it. And if it hadn't worked, I was as happy to come back and say, no, that was no good, as I was to come back and say, yeah, I think we've got something here. So I'm independent, and my colleague as well, I work with, I'll tell you a bit about him. But we were funded by the US Department of Homeland Security and the UK Centre for the Protection of National Infrastructure, which is a posh word for our security services. We were overseen, this project was a 2-year project, it was overseen by the TSA and the UK Department of Transport, so they were there. So I ran it, managed the project and the research and did the analysis, but people were on the ground all the time. And we worked with 2 partner airlines, AA and Delta, okay, who didn't get any funding, but they were happy to work with us. So think about truth default theory again, this is important. We thought about the context within which our procedure had to work, the consistency and the coherence, how much information would we get from our customers, our potential flyers, how could we use that in a short 3-minute interview, the diagnostic utility of all the questions that we were going to ask, because we only had 3 minutes, every question had to count, and also the types of questions that we were going to ask. Okay, so these are all the things that we took on board. This is why theory is useful. So I'm going to talk you through the problems of the project. So it was in a customer service environment. So I don't have to fly AA or Delta. I could fly British Airways, in which case I won't get this extra security. So this is me thinking like an American carrier. Really, really important. But it was also a security environment. I think your slides are mixed up in order, sorry. Apologies, go through them. So it was also a security environment, so we had to do both of them together as researchers. Time was critical because, again, I don't have to fly with an American carrier. I can fly with a British or an Australian carrier, in which case I won't have to queue up for 3/4 of an hour to go through security. I can just go straight through much quicker. Really, really important as a researcher. I had limited factual information about all the customers that came through. So what was I going to do? How was I going to ask them questions? I didn't know them, so I'd never seen them before, so I didn't have the luxury of any control information about them or control behaviour. The procedure had to be consistent and appropriate, so it had to be auditable, okay, but we wanted to make it unpredictable, very problematic. I was asking my screeners and myself, because I did this myself, about they had to make real-time decisions. Is that person a threat to our, or potential threat to our flight and our country, or is he or she not? Okay? And I also have to bear in mind that we have a truth/lie bias according to the context within which, if we work in a security environment, we tend to have a lie bias. Okay? Because we come across a lot of people that don't want to be truthful with us. So we have to bear both of those in mind. The other problem was the diagnostic utility, okay, so of the current procedure, which is still in place in many places around Europe in particular, in terms of if you want to fly into the US using a US carrier. We had the suspicious signs approach to deal with, which I'm not going to go over in too much detail, but largely it relies on documentation, your travel itinerary, the way in which you've purchased your tickets, for example, and this checklist of behaviours, which I'm taking a deep breath in because it maps onto all the myths and the pseudoscience that we all understand, and I suspect most of us do, about how people behave when they are a threat to us. So physical manifestations, so this notion of sweating and rubbing your nose and touching your ear, and nervousness, aggressiveness, rushing past the security staff and trying to get through the security procedure quickly, which of course I would do if I was late. If I hate flying, I will be nervous, I will be sweating, so on and so forth. If the passenger, PAX is a short for passenger, appears to be lying or withholding, well, what does that mean? A bit like trying to describe what rapport is. And then we've got the question. And those of you that work in this environment will know what I mean, but I'm going to give you an example. So based on everything that we've done so far as a group on questions, I want you to listen to this. Okay? So that, again, recorded in the real world. Okay, so you'll have to listen. I might have to play it a couple of times. It's literally less than a minute.
Yeah. First question, who owns the bags and the contents? Have you bought or obtained any of the bags recently?
No.
Who packed the bags for the flight? Where was the packing done?
I was told this morning.
Since then, where have the bags been kept? Have you got any items with you that you've received or borrowed from other people? Packages, books, gifts, letters. Can you describe, please, any battery operated or electrically operated item you have? You bought or obtained any of those recently? Any been repaired recently? Has any been lent to anybody? Have you got any items with you that might be mistaken for weapons or might be used as weapons? Just need to remind you that not to accept any item to take on board, and please don't leave your bag unattended.
Oops. It stops there. So, if we're going to critically evaluate that, what's happening? What's the obvious thing, first of all? I can't. Someone shout? What's the obvious thing about that? So,
No, I'm telling you.
Someone said something. I can't see who said it.
So the person was using non-open-ended questions.
What did you say? Non-recommended?
Non-open-ended.
Oh, yeah. Non-open-ended questions, you're right. Absolutely. The thing that's, I have to listen to what happens first before I can look to. Anybody else got any? You're right, perfect. Yeah, shout.
Yeah, I think it was scripted. The questions that he was asking were scripted, so they're questions that they expect when they come through.
Yeah, you're right. I'll praise it very quickly for you. That passenger was answering the questions before they were asked. Halfway through the questions, he's answering it. which tells us what? It's been through this procedure before. Yeah? Who's doing the most talking? The questioner, security staff. Okay, our results showed us that the security staff at that point, and it's not just this airline, it's the procedure, were talking 80% of the time at best, and the passenger was talking for less than 20% of the time. And what was the passenger saying? He was able to say, "Can I understand whether he's a threat to my country or the security of a flight?" With a yes or a no. No, I can't. Can I practice my live script when I go through that? Without deviating from my live script? Yes, I can. Okay, that hadn't been changed, and it's still, in most places, when you're coming into the US on a US carrier, it's still exactly the same. And I'll play you some when I travelled last month. Okay, it hasn't changed. Here's another example, just.
Okay, I'd just like to ask you some simple but extremely important questions regarding your luggage ship. Could you tell me who owns the bags and the contents, please? And how long have you owned the bags, just the suitcases themselves?
How long have I owned them? Years?
Yeah, that's right. That's right, sir. Who packed the bags for today's trip? When and where were those bags packed, sir?
At my grandmother's house.
Okay, from the time the bags were packed until now, Mr. Newman, where have those bags been?
My possession.
Could you describe to me or show me any items that you borrowed or received off anyone to take on board today's flight? We do have to ask that question, sir, as it's happened before. Passengers have received items, perhaps without their knowledge, which could have been bombs or narcotics. Could you describe to me or show me any battery operated or electrical items that you have, anything like cameras?
And so it goes on. Exactly the same set of questions, asked in a slightly different order. Was the screener listening to what that, was he giving himself time to listen? Do you think he'd have noticed if that passenger had said no when he should have said yes? They do hundreds of these, time and time and time again. And that they are asked to make a decision about whether that person can check into the flight. Because all the other conversations that go on past that are not verbal conversations, they're just physical experiences. You're going through an X-ray machine, your bags are going through an X-ray machine, or such like. You don't have another conversation, another security conversation with anybody. So this is what we were dealing with. And the other problem was about the consistency and the coherence of the information that we had available to us to test in such a short instant. All the information that was available to us as a screener, and I did the initial training and I was a screener for 6 months to understand their job, was that all I had in front of me was a document, a passport, an ESTA, and they bought a ticket. Well, the utility of that, the diagnostic utility of that information, very, very limited, because it's already been checked out. Otherwise, they wouldn't have got their ESTA. Otherwise, they would have come to notice beforehand. So we didn't have that. So we had to then rely on the coherence of the information that people were giving us when we were devising our technique. So we had the here and the now. So I had to use my questions to get people to provide us with a piece of information or an account of something, and I only could rely on the coherence of what they were saying. Did it make sense? And when I asked them questions that we practiced a little bit before, did those questions, did they map onto what they previously told me? So this is what we were thinking all the time as we worked through it. So first of all, we had to come up with a solution in terms of a possible replacement. And we came up with this CCE. And the way we thought about it was we needed a technique that tested the truthfulness of passengers' accounts, improved the chances of making passengers lie, because we know lies are not transparent. We've got to make them happen, otherwise I'll just stick to my lie script and then I can hide my lies. That was equal, because there's a conversation, and probably still now being had, but at that time 4 or 5 years ago, about this notion of profiling passengers. And of course history tells us that it doesn't matter where your passport comes from. If my passport was an Iranian or Iraqi passport, I'm no more of a threat to your country than if it's a British or an American passport. In fact, I'm more likely, if we're going to look at past occurrences, to be a threat to the security of your country with a British or American passport than I am with an Iraqi passport, for example. Pluck that out of me, dear. It's got to be unpredictable, because of course we know that unpredictable questions are most difficult for people that seek to harm us and our country. And we had to put our money where our mouth was, and we had to be scientists, and that means that we had to be empirical. That means that we had to do a big study on it, and it had to be scientifically based, so we had to trawl around the literature. What CCE does not do, and did not do, and we didn't want it to, was detect suspicious signs. So we threw all of that, I'm going to call it rubbish, but all of those things out of the window. We threw them all away and started with a clean slate, and we did not try and resolve any suspicious behaviour. So if verbal suspicion, if verbal behaviour and the accompanying physical behaviour made us suspicious, then we knew that we were experts in the field, and in that context, how you were acting, what you were saying in combination made us suspicious, then you went forward for further screening. We didn't try and resolve those suspicions. That's not what we wanted to do. And we came up with this technique, and these, I'm just going to very briefly talk. This is available in more depth if you want it, and I'll pass on the details to you, but just for the purposes of today's presentation, it's controlled because the screener or the questioner controls the conversation. It's conversational in nature, using many of the things that Steve and Eric and Chris have picked up on and spoken to you about that initial interaction, about, building rapport, but you've got to do it very, very quickly. So it's controlled by you. That means I'm not going to accept any information from you that I haven't elicited, that I haven't asked a question about. It's incremental and phased, so that means we teach you a scaffold. It's not a toolbox, it's a process, and we scaffold the process. So we give you the tools to actually be able to use the procedure and go through the procedure. It's got a managed questioning approach, so within each of the phases there are specific types of questions that we teach you to ask in a specific order. It's cognitive because, again, it relies on cognitive skills of the questioner. Okay? So it relies on you to use the technique and then come to some decision at the end of that technique based on that person's verbal performance and their accompanying behaviour as to whether you think they're a threat or not. It's asymmetrical cognitive loading. So again, that's a really posh word for giving me time to listen and making sure you do all the work, because I'm only going to ask you one or two questions. So tell me about, explain and describe, and that means that I'm able to listen. Those screeners, they were just going through a script. A really, really difficult job for them and quite boring, and they just switch off. Unpredictable for the receiver, so the type of questions we ask differ. So the topics of the questions differ. Every time you go through, you'll get the same structure, but you'll get different questions. It's engagement because it had to be customer service focused as well as a security procedure, because otherwise I'll just go and buy my ticket on Virgin. It reduces the stereotype biases, so it doesn't matter who you are, what you look like, what age you are, you come up to me and you get exactly the same security procedure every time you go through. And it, as I say, I've said to you, it's a structure. So the stages of a CCE, I've jotted down for you. The training to use it lasts a few days, and then we go out into the real world and practice it. And we trained it to a number of security screeners who they worked for organisations like ICTS, ISEC, who are subcontractors. So the employees are transient, often it's their second job sometimes. English often isn't their first language. And so they were quite we thought, quite a demanding group of trainees, but nonetheless we did train it, they did use it, and they were successful at it. So it's very doable, but it took a lot of practice. So stage one is this, where you get some idea of control behaviour. where you build rapport with someone. As soon as they walk up to you, I'm looking, I'm taking notice of what you look like. So, for example, I'm going to walk over to someone and it helps bring it to life. I'm spotting you, sir. If you were to walk up to me in a security context and I wanted to build rapport with you very, very quickly, the first thing I would notice is your Oakley sunglasses. The reason I notice those is because I've just bought a pair for my husband. So it resonates with me, and it's something that I can say. So when you're walking up to me, the first thing I'm thinking is sunglasses, because I want to talk to you about something inane, something that's nothing to do with the security process. And I say, hi, oh, I like your sunglasses, I've just bought a pair of those for my husband. Exactly. So straight away, he started to talk. I'm talking to him, he's talking to me. Really? What kind, he said. And we're getting into within a couple of seconds, we got involved in a conversation. When I was doing my screening, and I would take it from there, because people want to converse, it's a natural default to talk. In particular, when I was screening women, it was easy for me to screen women straight away, because often I would pick up on something that I'm interested in, handbags and shoes, you know that. Shoes are my thing. So if someone comes up and says, and they've got a really nice pair, I like your shoes, they're really cool. And she'd say, oh, really, yeah, I got these from blah, and that's the conversation. We've got to control behaviour. You're talking about your shoes, you're talking about your Oakley sunglasses, you can do it very, very quickly. But I'm working really hard. It looks like a conversation, but I'm working really hard because I'm then thinking, taking note, listening to what you're saying, watching how you're behaving, what you're saying. Before I move on to the next, which is information gathering. Okay, and this is when I then seamlessly, but in here I'm working hard, switch into right. I'm going into the security procedure now. And this is tell me, explain, describe, and I'll ask a question that will elicit a wide response, because you can't answer a tell, explain, describe with a yes-no question. Then I move on to, they provide me an account. So if Steve were to provide me an account of his family, okay, he's given me that. You don't get as much as that in an aviation security context. If he started to talk to me like that, he's a selectee straight away. Because I know with my experience, that's out of context. He's giving me far too much. Okay, that's my expertise, and I've only been doing it a few years. So those of you that do it more, so I know straight away. Then I've then got to listen to what he's saying, and I've got to come up with these unexpected veracity questions. So I'm trying to test the truth of what he said to me, and this is what we were trying to do. It takes practice, but it's very doable, and it's doable within 2 or 3 minutes. Once you practice it, you go through it, boof, boof, boof. Okay, trust me. You can go through these cycles. So once you've done this controls, I've talked to you about your Oakley sunglasses, you've asked me what kind, I'm happy to give you information, and my reply to that will be, I don't know what kind, they're just exactly like yours. You go, oh, you're likely to know what they are, perhaps you'll say, oh, these are eye jackets or whatever. And then I don't need to go through that control again, because I've already seen what he's like normally when he's talking about sunglasses. Okay? I know he's unlikely to be lying about that, because he doesn't need to. I could go through stage 2 and stage 3 on 3 occasions. If at that point I'm not happy, they're a selectee. Or if I'm happy after stage 2 and 3, then they can go through. Okay, so it's not. So I'm going to talk to you about the study, which is what makes this interesting. It took years off my life, I have to tell you. Yes. One of the most difficult things I've ever done, including giving birth to children. This is very, very, very demanding. So we had £750,000 in joint with the US-UK government, I've told you about, and we were tasked with doing some field trials. My colleague, Professor Tom Ormerod from the University of Sussex. And the reason that this funding went to us in the UK, I don't think because we're anything special. A, we were prepared to have a go, and I was very keen to have a go at this because I come from a practitioner background, and from my own perspective, it's no point in having something that's developed in a laboratory if you can't get it outside into the real world. And secondly, our rules, our laws of our country allow us to do covert recording in a way in which I know that you're not allowed to in this country. And that was important because we wanted real data from real passengers as well as our mock passengers. And so what we did was we developed our CCE technique and we directly compared it to the suspicious signs method, and that's the technique that you heard, which takes about a minute. A sort of an unfair comparison really from a scientific viewpoint. So it's like comparing a speed racer to a bike, really, top of the range BMW to a push bike. Because they're both very different, but that's all we had to compare it with. And we wanted to test the method under pressure, so we wanted to use it in the real world. I'll just talk you through this really quickly. It's quite boring, but we trained a number. First of all, I had to learn how to do the security screening myself and my colleague, and we learned what it was like to live their life, be in their shoes. Then what we did was we came up with our technique based on the problems, and we devised this method, and then we had to train the security staff. And we had to train a set of trainers so that we could set our technique adrift and walk away from it and give it to the practitioners to use. And that helps us to make sure that the technique actually does what it says it does. If we were to do it, then that would be an experimenter effect, which was not good science for us. Double-blind, randomised controlled trial. That's my colleague, Tom Ormerod. He wanted me to put that in there. What that means is that once they were trained, our security staff, they went out and they just used their training. And they knew that they were being covertly recorded because they were wearing the recorder, tiny little things that no one else can see. What they didn't know was that we were having mock passengers come through for 8 months. So they were being recorded under the pretense that we are going to see how our technique works, see how you can implement the training, does our training need tweaking? So it all went through the full ethics procedure, which I won't bore you with, and they signed up to that. What they didn't know was we had mock passengers, so we needed to make it. So that's all that means, in a nutshell. And we had 200 mock passengers go through airports with proper tickets, with ESTAs to travel to your country, and also with obviously valid passports, and they all learnt and practiced lie scripts. We had a base rate, so this is what's important, we had 1 deceptive passenger for every 1,000 real passengers. So all the others were proper passengers flying to your country, and embedded with each of those 1,000 was 1 mock passenger. And they came through over an 8-month period. Okay. And our screeners didn't know about that. They were incentivised financially, very heavily incentivised financially, to get through the screening procedure. So if they didn't do a good job and they got selected as undergoing further security, they lost their money. And it was they got paid about $500 for just coming and doing their 2 or 3 minutes and trying to get through, and an additional, I think it was $250 to get through the screening procedure. And if they didn't get through, they lost their money, or they thought that actually they did get it, but they didn't know that at the time. So we had to incentivise them, because otherwise it's not real world. And so in a nutshell, these are our results. So our CCE technique, when they first got trained, our security staff, and don't forget they were unlearning an old method, so it took them a while, practice, they got just over 63% of our mock passengers. So of our 200 passengers, they picked up 63% in terms of making them a selectee, putting a sticker on the back of their passport, which meant they went through extra layer of security. So there was something about their story using CCE that didn't pick up on. And our passengers went all the way through to airside, to the other side, so they weren't picked up by the screeners. So they didn't know they were mock passengers. By the time they'd been doing it for 6 months, these weren't the same passengers, these are new mock passengers, we were getting just approaching just over 74%. Not surprisingly, because as I said to you before, it was an unfair comparison, because our mock passengers were not forced outside of their live script, were they, by the suspicious signs? They could just say yes, no, yes, no. So we sort of knew that was going to happen, albeit that we did pick up one or two in the first instance. So these were quite exciting for us. They 3 million plus, and this data was collected at London Heathrow Airport, Gatwick Airport, Schiphol, Zurich, and Paris Charles de Gaulle. So we went round all of them, and they were all with our 2 airlines. So we trained people in all of those different countries. We did pick up on a paedophile ring, which if I have time I'll tell you about, going through London Heathrow, repeat offenders that used to go on the same flight, flying into Atlanta, and they've been doing it for approaching 5 years, and all of a sudden they just happened to go through the CCE method. And our screener realised, because it enhanced his interaction with them, that he'd screened 4 passengers that day for the same flight who all gave exactly the same story, live script. And he thought, context again, think about the context, this isn't right. But of course, all the previous times, they had been able to go through the old technique, the yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. So this is why context is important. And of course, here they were, all of a sudden, they just happened to be channeled through a channel that was going, the experimental channel, which they wouldn't have known about, it was all covert. But, and here is where I'm going to play you something, it's got to be done correctly. This technique only works if you go through those 3 stages, you ask the right questions in the right order, okay? And you test the veracity of the account. Okay, so have a little, is it going to work? Yeah, there we go. Have a little listen to this.
No, I'm not bringing a light type.
Here? Shall I put this on the belt?
Yeah. Music, are you all trained together? Yeah.
We're travelling as a group, yeah.
And how do you know each other?
How do we know each other? We're friends.
First, this is a security procedure. We're going to check you in individually.
Okay.
So if you want to take a step back and then anyone
Okay.
you can go first.
Yeah.
So that's why he's so crazy with it. Tell me a bit about your trip to the US.
Tell me.
A bit about your trip to the US.
I'm going to New York.
And how long have you been going to the airport?
Till, I'm sure you can see it on your screen, Tuesday, late Tuesday.
Tuesday. And where are you going to be staying?
The Waldorf.
And tell me what you do for a living, man.
I'm an academic.
And how long have you been doing that for?
5 years.
And whereabouts do you take?
What, where do I live?
Oh, your work.
Where do I work? Down here in London.
And what's the name of the place?
University of Wolverhampton, Westminster.
Just one back to Jersey?
Yep. Standing there at this point. Is it Chris saying about a phone? You're looking at the phone. He's not looking at me. Bear with me.
Your luggage receipts on the back of your boarding card?
Sorry?
Your luggage receipts on the back of your boarding card.
Okay.
Okay. And it's going to be gate number 28 and boarding at 9:25.
Okay. Is that the security done, is it?
Yeah.
Are you not meant to be testing my information?
I think
In thought I'd leave that in there just to be contentious. So that's me a few months ago going through London Heathrow Airport, where they've got a dispensation to use CCE. That is not a CCE. And that is what is being relied on to make a decision. As it happens, wasn't a threat to the country or the flight, but you'll have noticed a couple of my behaviours there. First of all, I don't give away any information. And that's just my background. I'm not free with information. He asked a series of closed questions. He asked loads of questions and I gave him the bare minimum. I also made an error, didn't I, so I would like to think, if you were going to ask a killer question to pick up on, to give yourself some sort of confidence about whether I was telling the truth or not, what might you have picked up on that? Say it.
You didn't know where you worked.
I didn't know where I worked, that's right. So, where might you... I don't know who's got the microphone for it. I mean, if it were me screening, first thing I would say, well, okay, so there's obviously some confusion between Westminster and Wolverhampton. Which one is it then? You know, I sort of do this. So that would invite a response. I'd need to provide an explanation about that, because there is some confusion. I've got a very good explanation about it, but my explanation would be, yeah, you're absolutely right. I've just got a new job at Westminster, and Westminster and Wolverhampton, they're fairly similar, and I'm getting confused with them. It happens still now. So whether you choose to believe that or not, but also the utility of that information is quite good as well, because you could go off and check that. It's a matter of public record when we work for universities, so we can sort of check it up on it. So it's got to be done properly, sadly.
What were they doing in that big pile of stones? Were they going to documents or what?
He's doing what he shouldn't have been doing. He was busy looking at his screen. So, you know, Chris was saying with the mobile phone, listening to you, looking at mobile phone, listening to you, looking at mobile phone. If I'm having to make notes while I'm interviewing, I'm listening, making notes, I'm listening, I'm making notes. He hasn't seen and looked at me. He's not looking at me, I'm just standing there. Not only has he asked me completely inappropriate questions in a way that he shouldn't have done, because I know he's done the training, because American Airlines had borrowed it. I know he's done the training, but he's not done what he should have done. He hasn't looked at me. My phone is sitting on the top there, audio recording that. I've not hidden it. He's not bothering to look at me. And you've got to look and watch people as well as listen. And he's not asked me the right questions, and he hasn't tested the information that I've given him. So I could have stayed within my live script quite easily. As it happens, it was truthful, and I had just mixed it up. But that's something you would pick up on. Is anybody else? So, the tests have got to be a test. The killer question is testing the truthfulness of my account, okay? Not my general knowledge. So, say, where's the University of Westminster? Well, that's my general knowledge, and I could make a pretty good guess in Westminster, which is in London. What's the address of your university? That's a better test. But I might have practiced that as well. But even better test would be, who's your new Vice-Chancellor? That would be the killer question. As it happens, I would have known, because I'd been interviewed by him some months earlier. If I was making that up, and you hadn't been to the University of Westminster, or you weren't working there, you wouldn't know that information. Straight away, that should be. And most of us academics, we know who our Vice-Chancellor is. No, might not know him personally. So that's the sort of questions we're looking at. So it's not difficult, but it just takes some thoughts and practice. So here's an example of one of my mock passengers getting caught out. It's not that long. How many minutes is it? About 2 minutes. So just listen to how the conversation evolves, and towards the end you'll hear him being caught out. So hopefully it's...
How are you? Good, good. How are you? Good. I'm fine too, it's okay. Was that sorry? I'm going out to meet up with some mates who are staying out there for a few weeks. I met them on my first year at university. Manchester. I met them at Manchester. Yeah. I'm staying with them. No, one was picking me up at the airport, I think. Yeah. What sort of things do you want to...
What do you do like that? Do you study or what do you...
Yeah, well, I'm in university at the moment.
Which university?
Manchester University.
And how did you get to the airport?
How do I get to the airport? I drove.
Oh, you drove, yeah. And what do you have on the phone?
I drove with my mum and she didn't come back with her. Yeah, she's going on somewhere else after this. So.
And what is your plan? What are you going to do with it? What is your plan?
I don't know, I was just going to catch up with my friends. I haven't seen them in a while.
And what does your friend do?
What do they do? They go to uni with me as well. But they're just out here for pleasure, I think. They're just staying out for a while. I don't know what they're doing. They're going to take me out the mountain things. Yeah, no worries.
Did you get that? Yeah. So this was right at the beginning of the training. This security screener, right at the beginning of his training. So he was just getting to grips with asking the right type of questions. You can hear he was having to work quite hard. But he found that question, and straight away, after that question, he said he'd just wait here a moment and then he was going to make him a selectee. So when that young man, who was in his late 20s, went through the security and border control, towards border control, he was actually picked up for further security. So I can't show you videos because we couldn't video record because it would have spoiled them, but you can hear. And with that change, with that question came a change of verbal behaviour. There was a longer delay, a response latency that was different, and also on the video recordings, which we got some covert recordings but not good enough to show you, there was a distinct change in his physical behaviour. You sort of saw him from going like this to it was automatic. But you only got that because it accompanied the verbal behaviour. They tripped him up. So that's an example of someone getting picked up on this. So I guess the obvious question is to ask, how does this help in Portal's context? Well, that is a Portal's context. So a very short space of time, you've got to manage that interaction, you've got to use your time very wisely, you've got to make sure that every question counts and it's got diagnostic utility, so it's got to be useful, and think about the context. Okay? Think about the normal, typical behaviour that you see in the context within which you're an expert, and you're all experts in a particular domain. So use that, but also use the methods and the things that we've talked to you about. So whether it's a formal interview, so you can also use this approach when you've got the luxury of a long-term interview, so interrogation, 3 or 4 hours maybe, or days, because you can also structure your interviewing strategy, and Chris talked about that with this funneling, so starting wide, going down and funneling in on particular topics, to disrupt a live script. Make it as difficult as possible for people to tell you a lie and be consistent in their lie. That's what this does. It helps by using this structure and the questioning, which isn't perfect. We're never going to catch every deceiver out. Okay, it's too difficult. But you're maximising the chances that you'll catch that person. Make sure that everything that comes out of your mouth is worthy. Okay, it's useful because while you're asking a question, you're depleting your own cognitive sort of resources. It's really hard being an interviewer and making it look relaxed and easy. Really, really hard. We're working very, very hard in our head. And don't let anybody tell you otherwise. So if you put interviewers in fMRI scanners and we look at the neural activity in their brain, the areas of their brain associated with the higher mental cognitive activity all start to fire off when you start to have to think about questions and asking questions. It's a really, really difficult job. It takes practice. Okay? So make sure that every question you ask, take your time, think about the question you're going to ask before you ask it. Make sure you ask one question and it gets as much information from that person as possible. CCE gives you a route map. It gives you a structure to move through in your mind, and you practice it really, and once you've used it over and over again, and we gave our screeners tiny little laminated cards which they could just prop up to remind themselves as they were learning it, and then they threw them away after that. It gathers information and it helps you be a smart, clever interviewer. Interviewing is like a game of chess, I think. You've got to outsmart your opponent, that's what I think. And I also think that everybody that sits in front of me is what I refer to as an able opponent. You know, think of them as being smart, and you've got to be smarter, and you can with the practice and the training. You just got to, don't let anybody tell you it's easy, it isn't, but you can do it because you're professionals. And the other thing that I would like you to take away is be unpredictable. Try not to allow people to predict, second guess the questions you're going to ask. Try and sort of think outside the box. How am I doing for time? Okay, that's good, because I thought it's all very well me talking to you about this, but I thought you might be interested in the context within which we have to work in the UK, England, Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland. Are you familiar with our approach? No? Good. I'm going to tell you something new then. You'll feel very sorry for me when you've heard all this. So, the reason we don't use the word interrogation anymore, we use the word investigative interview, and we use this term conversation, is that in the 1980s we had a massive shift of mindset in terms of the way in which we managed and thought about interviews with suspected offenders. We call them suspects, and I'm going to talk about suspects now and not witnesses and victims because it applied to suspects. One morning I came home from work one evening, Friday evening or Sunday evening because it was shift work as a police officer, and we were just interviewing people in the back of a car, down a corridor, in the yard, the exercise yard. Next day I went to work and absolutely everything was video and audio recorded from the moment I laid hands on someone. As soon as I relieved them of their liberty, I was not allowed to speak to them informally. And if I started to speak to them formally, everything was monitored. So everything changed. Okay. So everything's recorded, and we had to do all of our suspect interviews, so interrogations, with these 7 core principles, and I'm putting them down here. We were looking to seek information to gain an accurate and reliable account of that person's involvement or otherwise in a criminal offence. We had to have an investigative mindset. So we weren't seeking to prove what we thought was correct or what we hypothesised may have happened. What we were doing, we were meant to be going in there with a blank slate, collecting information. We then provided that information to a third party who made a decision on whether that would go forward for prosecution or not. We had to ask a range of questions to gain that information. And this is where this notion of question types, tell, explain, describe, closed questions, any information that was elicited from a leading question. So did you see the man? The leading question. Anything that came from that question was not admissible in a court of law. So I'd led him to the answer because I've already told him it's a man. Questions that were multiple questions. So did you see that person and what were they doing? They Typically, we know that suspects will answer the last element of the question, which means we missed a great big chunk of the question. That question was pulled apart as being not a suitable question, and all the information gathered as a result of that question was typically not admissible in a court of law. You can see where I'm going with this. So it's been like this for years now. So we were not duty bound to accept the answers provided by our suspects, and we could persistently question, but we had to stop after a certain point, because we know that we can make people confess to crimes they don't do if we keep on and on and on. Led to a lot of miscarriages of justice, and our interviewees, our suspects, had to write to silence. But we could continue to question. And if they said no comment, we just had to accept that. So this is our background. We don't work in a confession culture either. Confessions are not admissible in a court, in a British court, English court, Scottish court, unless there is some other corroborating evidence. So I don't care whether you are going to admit to being a mass murderer. If I've got no other evidence, I've got no witness. Obviously we don't have victims in murder cases because they're to provide information. I've got no DNA, I've got no witness information, I've got nothing from CCTV. That will not go to court. So we work within different parameters. So very, very different. I'm not saying it's right, I'm not saying it's wrong. They are the laws of our land. Okay. And we are liable to prosecution if we step outside of those. Not only are we liable to prosecution, but we are prosecuted. Okay. So this is why we have had to develop techniques that sit outside of the way in which a lot of countries interview. So psychology in the interviewer mindset. Obviously psychologists and interviewers in our country, and also now in your country and elsewhere, we work very closely together. And what we try and do when we work together, scientists and interrogators, interviewers, whatever you want to say, we are concerned with social cognition, which is the way in which people think, behave, make decisions in a social environment, and that's exactly what an interview is. Okay? We are not allowed to be coercive, and that doesn't matter, obviously physically coercive we're not allowed to be. We are not allowed to be mentally coercive. So I cannot keep accusing you of a crime when you've told me you haven't done it. Okay? We're not allowed to do it, I know. It just wouldn't happen. It can't happen. Anything that emanates from that interrogation would not be admissible. It would all go in the bin. So it's more than our life's worth to be coercive, to keep pressing people, to keep asking for a confession. We can't do it. We're information gathering, we're gathering information, and we are collecting it all up, and we are giving it. We don't make decisions on prosecution police anymore. That went out as well. We're non-accusatory, we don't accuse people of crime, we gather information, and we use clever questioning, strategic, tactical questioning, use of information, checking the veracity of what you say. We're not accusing you. Okay? And we have to provide our interviewees with interview objectives, including the topics that we are going to question them about. So, the take-home message, and this is where I sit, I'm an expert witness, I'm an interviewer advisor, I do various bits and pieces, and these are the parameters I have to work with. So psychological knowledge can help within those parameters, and I think this is what we're trying to get over to you, group of professionals, because you never know when these rules, these parameters, might migrate across the Atlantic, and they might be coming to you anytime soon. So psychological knowledge can assist within those parameters, because we try and understand social cognition, persuasion, trying to manage the conversation, trying to be a cerebral interviewer. Okay, expert questioning. You're all experts. Think about your questioning strategy, what you're going to say. Every question counts, and the diagnostic utility. So, is the question you're asking useful? Is it going to be useful for you or not? And again, we very strict time rules we have, which is why we try and think about the utility of our questions. I could go on, but that's a whole other presentation.